In the depths of a Polish fantasy novel series, a white-haired monster hunter prowled through words and pages, sword on his back, potions at his belt, preparing to make a leap from literature into the digital realm. This is the story of how The Witcher became one of gaming's most celebrated franchises, a tale of ambition, persistence, and the transformation of a relatively unknown Polish book series into a global phenomenon that would eventually sell over 85 million copies. The foundation of this empire rests on the imagination of Andrzej Sapkowski, a Polish fantasy writer born in 1948, who worked as an economist before turning to fiction. In 1986, his short story The Witcher appeared in Fantastica, Poland's premier fantasy magazine, introducing readers to Geralt of Rivia, a witcher, a genetically enhanced monster hunter who roamed a morally complex medieval world. This was no simple sword and sorcery tale. Sapkowski wove together Slavic folklore, dark fairy tale reinterpretations, and sophisticated explorations of prejudice, destiny, and the nature of evil itself. Throughout the late 80s and 90s, Sapkowski expanded this universe through additional short story collections and a 5-book saga that followed Geralt and his adopted daughter Ciri through political upheaval, war, and cosmic-level threats. While The Witcher novels became enormously popular in Poland and throughout Eastern Europe, they remained relatively obscure in the West. The books existed in a curious limbo, celebrated in their home region but unknown to the vast English-speaking fantasy audience that devoured Tolkien, Jordan and Martin. This would change, but not through traditional publishing channels. Instead, a video game would serve as the catalyst that brought Geralt to the world stage. CD Projekt began not as a game developer but as a distributor. Founded in 1994 by Marcin Nowinski and Michał Kiciński, the company imported Western games into Poland, localizing them for the Polish market. This work proved crucial in establishing CD Projekt's reputation and, more importantly, their understanding of what made Western RPGs successful. They brought Baldur's Gate to Poland, along with the Gothic series, which became particularly successful in the region. Gothic's dark, immersive world and moral complexity resonated with Polish audiences, and CD Projekt reaped the financial rewards of publishing the series locally. These Gothic games would later serve as a primary influence when CD Projekt decided to develop their own title. But this wasn't the first attempt to transform Sapkowski's Witcher into a game. In 1996 and 1997, another Polish studio, Metropolis Software, began developing a Witcher game. The project never materialized. Details remain scarce about why. Development ceased, but we can infer that the technical challenges and market uncertainties of the mid-90s proved insurmountable. Poland's game development industry was still in its infancy, and creating a complex RPG based on a literary property represented a massive undertaking. The project quietly disappeared, leaving Geralt's digital destiny uncertain. Years passed. CD Projekt continued distributing games, building capital and industry knowledge. The success of Gothic in Poland demonstrated that Polish gamers craved deep, story-driven RPGs set in morally grey worlds. Somewhere in this period, an audacious idea took shape. What if CD Projekt created their own RPG? What if they adapted The Witcher, a property that combined the dark tone and complex characters Polish audiences clearly appreciated, with the added benefit of being a beloved local creation? The decision carried enormous risk. CD Projekt had never developed a game before. They were distributors, localizers, business people, not programmers or designers. Creating a major RPG from scratch would require assembling a development team, licensing technology, and competing against established Western studios with decades of experience. Nevertheless, they moved forward. In 2002, CD Projekt established a development division that would eventually become CD Projekt RED. They secured the rights to The Witcher from Sapkowski, reportedly for a relatively modest upfront payment, a decision that would later become a source of significant controversy. For the game engine, they made a pragmatic choice. Rather than building proprietary technology from the ground up, they licensed BioWare's Aurora engine, the same technology powering Neverwinter Nights. This decision made sense on multiple levels. The Aurora engine had proven capable of delivering complex story-driven RPGs. BioWare had created detailed tools for quest creation and dialogue trees, and perhaps most importantly, licensing established technology allowed CD Projekt RED to focus their limited resources on content, story, and world building rather than fundamental technical infrastructure. But they didn't simply use Aurora as is. CD Projekt RED extensively modified the engine, implementing a completely new rendering system optimized for the single-player experience they envisioned. While BioWare's original engine used a tile-based system for building environments, CD Projekt RED developed a workflow using 3ds Max, allowing them to create more organic, detailed spaces. They redesigned core systems, rebuilt the combat mechanics from scratch, and created a visual style that could capture the dark, rain-soaked atmosphere of Sapkowski's world. What emerged was recognizably Aurora in its bones, but transformed in almost every visible aspect. Development stretched across several years. The team grew from a handful of people to dozens, then over 100. They were learning as they built, making mistakes, iterating, discovering what worked and what didn't. Screenshots and early footage began appearing in gaming magazines, generating curiosity. Here was a Polish studio creating an RPG based on books most Western gamers had never heard of, featuring a protagonist with white hair, yellow eyes, and 2 swords. The project seemed simultaneously intriguing and uncertain. Would anyone outside Poland care about this Witcher? The year 2007 proved pivotal for CD Projekt RED and for the entire Polish game development industry. On October 26th in Europe and October 30th in North America, The Witcher released, introducing the world to Geralt of Rivia in digital form. This was the culmination of years of work by a studio that had never shipped a game before, attempting to compete in one of gaming's most demanding genres against experienced developers. The result was simultaneously triumphant and troubled, a game that revealed both CD Projekt RED's narrative ambitions and their technical growing pains. The Witcher opened with Geralt suffering from amnesia, a narrative device that served multiple purposes. Story-wise, it aligned with the ending of Sapkowski's novels, where Geralt's fate remained ambiguous. Practically, amnesia provided a perfect tutorial mechanism, allowing players unfamiliar with the books to learn about the world alongside Geralt as he rediscovered his past. The Witcher awakens near Kaer Morhen, the ruined fortress where witchers once trained, with no memory of his previous adventures. This blank slate approach meant new players didn't need to have read 5 novels and multiple short stories to understand what was happening. Geralt's friends and enemies would explain their relationships to him, and by extension to the player. The story quickly moved into action. Kaer Morhen comes under attack by a mysterious organization called Salamandra, who steal the secret formulae for creating new witchers and kill a young witcher named Leo in the process. Geralt pursues these attackers, eventually reaching the city of Vizima, where the game's main narrative unfolds. Here, the player navigates complex political tensions, a brewing conflict between humans and non-humans, the machinations of a powerful knightly order, and mysterious forces manipulating events from the shadows. The Witcher distinguished itself through moral complexity. This was not a game of obvious heroes and villains, clear good and evil choices. Instead, players face situations where every option carried consequences, where choosing the lesser evil often meant determining which group would suffer. An early quest exemplifies this approach. Geralt must choose between humans and elves in a dispute, but neither side holds the moral high ground. The humans are bigoted and oppressive, but some elves respond with terrorism and murder of innocents. What does a Witcher do when neutrality proves impossible? The game refused to provide simple answers, instead forcing players to live with their decisions and witness the long-term consequences. Combat in The Witcher utilized a rhythm-based system built around 3 distinct fighting styles. The fast style allowed rapid attacks effective against quick enemies like drowners. The strong style delivered powerful blows suited for heavily armored opponents or large monsters. The group style let Geralt fight multiple weak enemies simultaneously, swinging his blade in wide arcs. Players initiated combat by clicking on enemies, then timed subsequent clicks to chain attacks together, with the cursor changing to indicate the optimal moment for the next strike. Successfully timing these clicks built combo chains that grew increasingly devastating. This combat system proved divisive. Some players appreciated its unique approach and the satisfaction of perfectly timed combo chains flowing from one enemy to the next. Others found it repetitive and disconnected, feeling more like rhythm game mechanics than visceral sword fighting. The system had its merits. It was certainly distinctive, and it rewarded players who mastered its timing. But it also lacked the immediate tactile feedback that made the best action games compelling. You clicked and watched Geralt's elaborate animations play out rather than directly controlling each swing and parry. Beyond swordplay, The Witcher emphasized preparation. Witchers use alchemy extensively, crafting potions that enhance their already formidable abilities. Unlike many RPGs where potions simply restore health or mana, Witcher potions in this game provided complex buffs, increased resistance to poison, enhanced vision in darkness, improved reflexes, or heightened strength. But these concoctions came with a cost. Witcher potions are toxic, and consuming too many simultaneously would poison Geralt himself. Players had to carefully plan which potions to drink before entering combat, as the game required meditation to consume them. This meant you couldn't simply chug healing potions mid-battle. You had to research your target, understand its weaknesses, brew the appropriate potions, drink them, and then engage. This approach to combat preparation rewarded planning and knowledge. The game included an extensive bestiary that players filled in by reading books and examining monster corpses. Each entry provided information about creature vulnerabilities, which oils to apply to your blade, which potions would prove most effective, what combat style worked best. Fighting a werewolf without preparation meant a brutal, protracted battle. Fighting the same werewolf after researching it, crafting moon dust bombs, applying the appropriate blade oil, and drinking the right potions transformed the encounter into a manageable challenge. This was monster hunting as a professional craft rather than simple hack-and-slash combat. The game also featured Geralt's signs, simple magical abilities that complemented his swordsmanship. Ard blasted enemies backward with a telekinetic force. Igni unleashed a gout of flame. Erden created magical traps on the ground. Quen surrounded Geralt with a protective shield. Axii confused or dominated minds. These weren't meant to be powerful spells in the traditional RPG sense. Witchers are enhanced warriors who use magic as a tool, not mages who happen to carry swords. The signs provided tactical options, stunning enemies, controlling crowds, or providing brief protection. But swordplay remained central to combat. The visual presentation achieved something remarkable for a game from a first-time developer. The Witcher captured a specific aesthetic. Rain-slicked streets, candles flickering in darkness, the weathered faces of peasants and nobles alike. The game's world felt lived in and grounded despite the fantasy elements. Vizima's slums reeked of desperation and filth. The forest paths where Geralt hunted monsters conveyed genuine danger lurking between the trees. Weather effects and day-night cycles added to the immersion, with NPCs following routines and the world changing character as hours passed. This attention to atmosphere helped compensate for what the graphics lacked in technical sophistication compared to big-budget Western titles. But the launch version of The Witcher arrived with significant problems. Bugs plagued the experience, quests that wouldn't complete, items that disappeared, performance issues that made some areas nearly unplayable, load times between areas stretched, painfully long. The English voice acting ranged from adequate to embarrassingly poor, with inconsistent accents and wooden delivery undermining dramatic moments. The interface, clearly designed with PC keyboard and mouse in mind, often proved clunky and unintuitive. These technical shortcomings threatened to overshadow the game's narrative strengths and ambitious world-building. Critical reception reflected this dichotomy. Reviewers praised the mature storytelling, morally complex choices, and atmospheric world-building, while noting the technical problems and occasionally tedious gameplay. Scores generally fell in the 80s out of 100. Good but not great. Impressive for a debut effort but held back by rough edges. More importantly, word of mouth began building, particularly among hardcore RPG fans, who valued deep stories and meaningful choices over polish and technical perfection. The Witcher found its audience, people willing to overlook bugs and interface issues for the sake of experiencing Geralt's dark fantasy world. Sales started modestly but grew steadily. The game performed well in Poland as expected, but also found success in Germany, Russia, and other European markets. In the first 10 months following release, The Witcher sold 800,000 copies worldwide. Not blockbuster numbers, but more than respectable for a new IP from an unknown studio. The game had established a foothold, proven that CD Projekt RED could deliver a compelling RPG, and built a foundation for what would come next. But the team wasn't satisfied with merely adequate. They wanted to address the criticism, fix the problems, and give The Witcher the polish it deserved. September 2008 brought redemption in the form of The Witcher Enhanced Edition. This wasn't a simple patch with bug fixes. CD Projekt RED undertook a comprehensive overhaul of their debut game, addressing nearly every criticism levelled at the original release. For players who already owned The Witcher, this enhanced edition arrived as a free update, an unusual and generous gesture that built enormous goodwill within the gaming community. For new players, it represented the definitive version of the game, the experience CD Projekt RED had wanted to deliver from the beginning. The improvements touched every aspect of the game. CD Projekt RED re-recorded over 5,000 lines of dialogue, bringing in better voice actors and ensuring consistent quality and accents throughout. Loading times were dramatically reduced through optimization. The interface received a comprehensive redesign, making inventory management and navigation more intuitive. Hundreds of bugs were squashed. Texture quality improved. character models saw upgrades. The cumulative effect transformed the experience from rough diamond to polished gem. The enhanced edition also included additional content. 2 new adventure modules expanded the game, the Price of Neutrality and Side Effects, each offering several hours of gameplay and new insights into Geralt's world and philosophy. The development team included a comprehensive making-of documentary, showing players the journey from concept to release. They added an official editor, enabling the community to create their own adventures using the game's tools and assets. This complete package, offered free to existing owners and sold at budget price for newcomers, demonstrated CD Projekt RED's commitment to their players and their craft. The enhanced edition's reception vindicated this approach. Reviews improved across the board, with many publications revising their original scores upward. The RPG community embraced the game more fully, recognizing it as one of the genre's strongest recent offerings. Sales accelerated. The Witcher began appearing in discussions of the best RPGs of the generation, alongside BioWare and Bethesda titles. CD Projekt RED had not only fixed their game, they had established their reputation as a developer that listened to feedback and supported their products post-release. This reputation would serve them well in the years ahead. With The Witcher's success on PC firmly established, attention turned to consoles. In late 2008, CD Projekt RED announced The Witcher: Rise of the White Wolf, a console version being developed for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. This wouldn't be a simple port. The studio partnered with Widescreen Games to rebuild The Witcher using an entirely new engine called DaVinci, engine designed specifically for console hardware and control schemes. Rise of the White Wolf promised significant changes and additions. The combat system would be completely redesigned, moving away from the click timing mechanics toward a more action-oriented approach, better suited to console controllers. Players would directly control Geralt's defensive maneuvers, giving them greater moment-to-moment agency in battles. Enhanced AI would make enemies more challenging and reactive. The interface would be rebuilt from scratch for controllers rather than keyboard and mouse. New boss battles, new character models, additional music, and a revamped character development system would distinguish this version from its PC predecessor. Early footage looked promising. CD Projekt RED seemed poised to bring The Witcher to a much larger console audience, potentially expanding the franchise's reach exponentially. But behind the scenes, problems emerged. Disagreements arose between CD Projekt RED and Widescreen Games over payment and development direction. The relationship deteriorated. In May 2009, CD Projekt RED announced that development of Rise of the White Wolf had been suspended indefinitely due to payment problems with the console developer. The cancellation disappointed many console players who'd been anticipating the game, but in retrospect it may have been for the best. The resources and energy that would have gone into supporting Rise of the White Wolf could instead be focused on the sequel CD Projekt RED had already begun developing. Rather than stretching their still small team across multiple platforms and versions, they could concentrate on making The Witcher 2 everything they envisioned. The lessons learned from the first game's development, both its successes and its struggles, would inform a more ambitious, more polished second chapter in Geralt's digital adventures. While The Witcher, Enhanced Edition, polished the first game to a brilliant sheen, CD Projekt RED had already set their sights on something far more ambitious. The Aurora engine, despite extensive modifications, had reached the limits of what it could deliver. For their second game, the studio needed technology capable of realizing a more sophisticated vision, better graphics, more complex interactions, improved combat systems, and crucially, the ability to tell a non-linear story with genuinely divergent paths. This meant building their own engine from scratch, a monumental undertaking for a studio that had released only one game. Development of what would become REDengine began in parallel with work on The Witcher's Enhanced Edition. CD Projekt RED assembled a team of programmers tasked with creating a proprietary game engine that could power not just The Witcher 2, but potentially future projects beyond. This decision represented a massive investment of time and resources. Game engines are complex beasts requiring years of development and countless hours of optimization. Many studios license existing technology, Unreal Engine, Unity, or CryEngine, precisely to avoid this burden. But CD Projekt RED wanted complete control over their technical foundation, the freedom to optimize for their specific needs without negotiating with external licensors or working around limitations baked into someone else's code. The first REDengine would debut with The Witcher 2, designed specifically for the visual and gameplay demands of Geralt's next adventure. The development team focused on creating technology that could deliver cinematic presentation, detailed character models and animations, sophisticated lighting and weather effects, and most importantly, the ability to branch the story in meaningful ways. Previous games with multiple endings typically reconverged to the same narrative beats regardless of player choices. CD Projekt RED wanted entire chapters that played out differently, based on a single critical decision, requiring the engine to support essentially 2 games in one. Before The Witcher 2 was officially announced, the gaming world got an unexpected glimpse. On September 16, 2009, footage labelled The Witcher 2 gameplay internal video leaked online. According to CD Projekt RED, this video had been created about 6 months earlier using a very early alpha version of the game, intended solely for showing potential publishers what the studio was developing. The footage featured placeholder voice acting by CD Projekt RED staff members rather than professional actors. The visuals, while clearly superior to the first game, were rough and unfinished. CD Projekt RED responded to the leak with a brief FAQ acknowledging the video's authenticity while emphasizing how early in development the game remained. They made clear that people should not expect The Witcher too soon, as the game was still deeply in the development stage. This leak proved both a blessing and a curse. It generated enormous buzz and anticipation. Clearly, The Witcher 2 was going to be a significant visual upgrade from its predecessor, but it also raised expectations and created pressure on a team that still had years of work ahead. 6 months after the leak, on March 24, 2010, CD Projekt RED officially announced The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings. The announcement came with a proper trailer, articles and gaming publications, and the launch of official forums and a website. The 2-minute trailer showcased the REDengine's capabilities, detailed character models, sophisticated lighting, cinematic camera work, and a glimpse of the conspiracy-laden story that would drive the game's narrative. Geralt looked better than ever, his white hair flowing realistically, his armor showing wear and battle damage, his movements fluid and natural. The stated ambitions were lofty. The Witcher 2 would feature 3 independent plot lines leading to multiple endings. The combat system would be completely redesigned, more tactical and dynamic than the rhythm-based clicking of the first game. The world would be more detailed and interactive. Choices would have far-reaching consequences, not just in dialogue but in how entire sections of the game unfolded. CD Projekt RED was promising nothing less than a new standard for consequence-driven narrative in RPGs. Development continued through 2010 and into 2011. The team grew larger, bringing in additional artists, programmers, writers, and designers. They were no longer the scrappy unknown studio that had surprised people with The Witcher. Now they were an established developer with a successful game behind them, expectations to meet, and a reputation to uphold. The pressure was immense. Could they deliver on their ambitious promises? Would the new combat system satisfy players? Would the branching narrative actually work, or would it feel like smoke and mirrors, converging back to the same story regardless of choices? Screenshots and previews throughout this period showed steady progress. The game looked gorgeous, with attention to detail in environments and character models that surpassed most contemporary RPGs. The promise of a truly branching story attracted intense interest from players tired of games that offered the illusion of choice without meaningful consequences. May 17th, 2011 was set as the release date. After years of development, hundreds of people working countless hours, and the creation of an entirely new game engine, The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings would finally arrive. The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings launched on May 17, 2011, exclusively for Windows PC, and immediately established itself as a landmark achievement in RPG design. This was CD Projekt RED's sophomore effort, the game where they proved their debut wasn't a fluke, where they demonstrated mastery of their craft and delivered on nearly every promise made during development. The Witcher 2 would go on to sell over 8 million copies and win more than 50 awards, but more importantly, it would cement The Witcher as a premier RPG franchise and set the stage for the series' greatest triumph. The story picked up almost immediately after the first game's conclusion. Geralt has become King Foltest of Temeria's personal bodyguard following the events in Vizima. As the game opens, Foltest is besieging La Valette Castle, attempting to claim his illegitimate children from a former lover who refuses to surrender them. Geralt accompanies the king during the assault, and in the opening prologue, players experience the fall of the castle through a combination of combat tutorial and story setup. But just as victory seems assured, an assassin strikes. Foltest dies despite Geralt's protection, killed by a mysterious Witcher-like fighter who escapes, leaving Geralt as the primary suspect in regicide. The prologue introduces Vernon Roche, commander of Temeria's elite special forces unit, the Blue Stripes. Roche interrogates Geralt in the La Valette dungeon, and the Witcher must convince this hard-edged soldier of his innocence. The prologue unfolds through flashbacks as Geralt recounts the siege and assassination, allowing players to learn the new combat system while establishing the central mystery: who killed Foltest and why? Roche eventually believes Geralt's story and helps him escape. Together with the sorceress Triss Merigold, they flee by boat toward the town of Flotsam, beginning a hunt for the real assassin, a witcher known as Letho of Gulet. Where The Witcher 2 fundamentally distinguished itself was in its approach to narrative structure. Most RPGs with choice and consequence offer variations on a theme. You can be good or evil, save or condemn various characters, but the main story beats remain largely the same. The Witcher 2 did something different. At the end of the first chapter in Flotsam, players must make a critical choice: ally with Vernon Roche or with Yorveth, a guerrilla leader of the Scoia'tael, elven freedom fighters who use terrorist tactics against human oppression. This choice wasn't cosmetic. It determined which version of Chapter 2 you experienced. Players who sided with Roche would find themselves in a military camp working alongside King Henselt's forces and dealing with political intrigue from that perspective. Players who chose Yorveth would instead be in Vergen, the dwarven town resisting Henselt. Seeing the same conflict from the opposite side, these weren't merely different camera angles on the same events. They were substantially different experiences with different quests, different characters, different locations, and different revelations about the overarching conspiracy. Only in Chapter 3 would the paths reconverge, bringing Geralt to Loch Muini for a summit of kings and sorceresses where the conspiracy behind the royal assassinations would finally be revealed. But even here, choices mattered. Players had to decide whether to save Triss or rescue other important characters. They had to choose whom to support in the complex political manoeuvring. And finally, they had to confront Letho and decide his fate. Kill him in a duel, or let him go after hearing his story. Each decision carried weight, shaping the political landscape and determining which factions would rise or fall as the game concluded. This structure meant that to fully understand The Witcher 2's story, you needed to play through at least twice, once with each major path. The Roche path revealed certain aspects of the conspiracy. The Yorveth path revealed others. Together they provided a complete picture of the forces manipulating events behind the scenes, the involvement of the Empire of Nilfgaard, and the complex web of motivations driving the various factions. No other mainstream RPG had attempted anything quite this ambitious. This was true non-linearity, expensive and time-consuming to develop, but delivering an experience that felt genuinely shaped by player decisions. Combat underwent a complete overhaul from the first game. Gone was the rhythm-based clicking system. The Witcher 2's combat drew more inspiration from action games, requiring timing, positioning, and tactical awareness. Players directly controlled Geralt's movements and attacks, dodging and rolling to avoid damage, positioning themselves to attack from advantageous angles, and using signs to control the battlefield. The change proved divisive. Some players missed the unique approach of the first game, while others appreciated the more visceral, involved combat. The difficulty ramped up significantly. The Witcher 2 didn't hold players' hands. Early encounters could be brutally punishing if approached recklessly. Players needed to prepare properly, applying oils to blades, drinking appropriate potions, setting traps, and fighting intelligently. Button mashing led to quick deaths. This unforgiving nature frustrated some players but delighted others who appreciated a game that demanded mastery and punished mistakes. CD Projekt RED later added difficulty options to accommodate both preferences, but the core philosophy remained. Witcher work is dangerous, and Geralt isn't invincible despite his mutations. The visual presentation represented a generational leap from the first game. REDengine delivered stunning graphics for 2011, detailed textures, sophisticated lighting, impressive character models, and cinematic presentation that made cutscenes feel seamless with gameplay. The world felt more grounded and believable than ever, from the grimy port town of Flotsam, to the war-torn landscapes of Aedan, to the ancient ruins of Loch Muin. Weather effects added atmosphere. Rain fell in sheets, mist clung to forests, and day-night cycles changed the character of locations. This was a world that felt alive and dangerous. The political themes grew even more prominent than in the first game. The Witcher 2 explored questions of nationalism, racism, revolution, and the costs of war with a sophistication rare in gaming. The conflict between humans and non-humans, elves, dwarves, and other races, formed a central thread. Humans oppress non-humans, ghettoizing them, denying them rights, treating them as lesser. Some non-humans respond with violence, bombing marketplaces and assassinating human leaders. Geralt, trying to remain neutral, finds himself forced to take sides, to make impossible choices between imperfect options. No faction in The Witcher 2 holds the moral high ground. The human kingdoms are corrupt, oppressive, and often brutal. The Scoia'tael fight for legitimate grievances but employ terrorist tactics that kill innocents. The Lodge of Sorceresses manipulates events for their own conception of the greater good, treating individuals as pawns. King Henselt is a conqueror. The Church hunts magic users. Temeria struggles to maintain order, and behind everything, Nilfgaard watches and plans, ready to exploit the chaos for imperial expansion. The game refused to provide simple answers or clear villains, instead presenting a world where everyone believes they're justified and power determines who writes history. Critical reception was overwhelmingly positive. Reviewers praised the gorgeous graphics, the branching narrative, the mature themes, and the ambitious scope. Some criticized the combat system's difficulty and occasional clunkiness. Some found the pacing uneven, but the consensus held that The Witcher 2 represented a major achievement, a game that pushed the RPG genre forward and proved CD Projekt RED belonged in the top tier of developers. Metacritic scores hovered around 88, with many publications awarding perfect or near-perfect marks. Sales started strong and grew steadily. The game found particular success on PC, where digital distribution through services like GOG.com, which CD Projekt owned, and Steam made it easily accessible. But CD Projekt RED hadn't abandoned console ambitions. On April 17, 2012, The Witcher 2, Assassins of King's Enhanced Edition, launched for Xbox 360, alongside an updated PC version. Like the first game's Enhanced Edition, this represented more than a simple port. The Xbox version included all previous DLC, new content, improved tutorials, a better camera system, and refined controls optimized for controllers. The PC Enhanced Edition received these improvements as a free update, once again demonstrating CD Projekt RED's commitment to supporting their games and respecting their players. The Enhanced Edition introduced Arena Mode, where players fought endless waves of enemies, testing their combat skills. It added Dark Mode, an extreme difficulty setting for masochists and challenge seekers. New adventures expanded the story, adding over 4 hours of additional content and introducing new characters who would later appear in The Witcher 3. The complete package represented the definitive version of the game, and it arrived free for existing PC owners and at a fair price for new players and Xbox adopters. By the time The Witcher 2's release cycle concluded, it had accumulated an impressive list of accolades, Game of the Year awards from multiple publications, recognition for Best Story, Best Graphics, Best RPG, and Best Adaptation of a Licensed Property. More importantly, it had established The Witcher as one of gaming's premier franchises. CD Projekt RED had proven themselves twice over, first with a flawed but ambitious debut, then with a polished, sophisticated sequel that delivered on its promises. The foundation was laid for something even greater. Work had already begun on The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, a game that would attempt the seemingly impossible, creating an open-world RPG that married the narrative sophistication of The Witcher with the freedom and exploration of games like Skyrim. If The Witcher 2 proved CD Projekt RED could compete with the industry's best, The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt would establish them as one of gaming's most accomplished developers, released on May 19, 2015. The Witcher 3 represented an exponential expansion in scope and ambition. Where the first two games featured relatively constrained areas, individual cities, forest paths, military camps, The Witcher 3 would give players an entire open world to explore, complete with dynamic weather, day-night cycles, an ecosystem of wildlife and monsters, and hundreds of hours of content spread across multiple massive regions. The development of The Witcher 3 pushed CD Projekt RED to their limits and beyond. The team grew to over 250 people working directly on the game, with additional external contractors and support studios contributing. Development spanned approximately 3.5 years, consuming enormous resources and requiring the studio to expand their Warsaw headquarters and open new offices. They were attempting something incredibly difficult, creating an open world that maintained the narrative quality and quest design sophistication. The Witcher series was known for while matching the freedom and exploration of the Elder Scrolls and Grand Theft Auto games that had defined the open-world genre. The story brought Geralt's trilogy to a conclusion while introducing new players to the series. Set 6 months after The Witcher 2, the game opens with Geralt searching for his former lover, the sorceress Yennefer of Vengerberg, whom he has finally remembered after years of amnesia. Yennefer tasks him with finding Ciri, Cirilla, the child of prophecy, Geralt's adopted daughter possessing powers that could reshape the world. Ciri is being hunted by the Wild Hunt, a spectral army of elven warriors led by Eredin, who seek to capture her and exploit her abilities for their own purposes. This setup allowed The Witcher 3 to explore multiple storylines simultaneously. There's the personal quest, finding Ciri, protecting her, and dealing with the relationship between Geralt and the daughter he raised. There's the political dimension, the ongoing war between the Northern Kingdoms and the Nilfgaardian Empire, with Geralt caught in the middle, working sometimes with and sometimes against various factions. There's the mythological threat, the Wild Hunt itself, riders between worlds, representing danger on a cosmic scale, and woven through everything, there are the hundreds of smaller stories told through side quests, contracts, and random encounters, each crafted with care and attention to detail that most games reserve only for main storylines. The world itself sprawled across multiple distinct regions. White Orchard served as the tutorial area, a small zone where players learned the game's systems. Velen, called No Man's Land, offered a vast, war-torn landscape of swamps, forests, and beleaguered villages, showing the human cost of the Nilfgaard Northern War. The city of Novigrad provided urban adventure, with its teeming streets, political intrigue, crime underworld, and witch-hunting church. Skellige, an archipelago inspired by Viking culture, delivered rugged islands, fierce warriors, and ancient mysteries. And later, the DLC would add Toussaint, a sun-drenched wine country that felt like a fairy tale compared to the grim reality of Velen. What set The Witcher 3's open world apart was the quality of content filling it. Too many open-world games stuff their maps with repetitive objectives. Collect these collectibles, clear these identical bandit camps, climb these towers to reveal the map. The Witcher 3 approached content differently. Every question mark on the map led to something designed, often with its own micro-story. You might find a battlefield where ghosts reenact their final moments, or a monster nest that required specific tactics to destroy, or a treasure hunt with multiple stages revealing a tragic tale. Witcher contracts tasked players with investigating monster attacks, identifying the creature, preparing appropriately, and executing the hunt. Each one essentially a mini detective story culminating in a unique boss fight. The side quests achieved something remarkable. They matched or exceeded the quality of most games' main storylines. The Bloody Baron questline alone, a multi-part story about a broken man, his dysfunctional family, and the consequences of his choices, could have served as the centerpiece of another game. Quests rarely involved simple fetch this, kill that objectives. Instead, they presented situations that required investigation, moral judgment, and decisions with genuine consequences. a contract to deal with a monster might evolve into a meditation on justice and revenge. A favour for a friend could spiral into political intrigue with kingdom-shaking implications. Combat evolved again, finding a middle ground between The Witcher 2's challenging action and the need to accommodate players who primarily wanted to experience the story. The fundamentals remained, sword fighting supplemented with signs, bombs and potions, but the execution felt smoother, more responsive and more forgiving at lower difficulties while still offering significant challenge for those who wanted it. Players could customize Geralt's abilities through an expanded skill tree, specializing in swordplay, magic, alchemy, or creating hybrid builds. Gear progression provided meaningful advancement without overwhelming players with excessive loot. The best equipment came from crafting Witcher gear through scavenger hunt questlines, giving players tangible goals beyond simply finding better random drops. The visual presentation remained stunning years after release. REDengine had matured significantly, now capable of rendering vast distances, complex weather patterns, and extraordinarily detailed character models and environments. The game's dynamic weather system wasn't just cosmetic. Rain made surfaces slippery, storms tossed ships on the sea, and fog could reduce visibility during hunts. The day-night cycle affected more than lighting. Certain quests could only be completed at specific times, some monsters only appeared after dark, and NPC schedules changed throughout the day. But perhaps The Witcher 3's greatest achievement was its characters. Geralt himself, voiced by Doug Cockle, had fully come into his own. Gruff but not humourless, professional but not heartless, capable of deep emotion beneath his Witcher's facade. Yennefer, Triss, Ciri, Dandelion, Zoltan, and a host of other returning characters felt like people you had history with. Relationships built over 3 games and years of digital companionship. New characters like the Bloody Baron, Kira Metz, Dijkstra, and the various monarchs and sorceresses brought fresh dynamics and perspectives. The relationship between Geralt and Ciri anchored the emotional core of the game. Throughout the hunt for her, players experience flashback sequences where you actually play as Ciri, wielding her unique powers and learning her story. These sequences broke up the pacing while building investment in this character, whose safety drives the plot forward. When Geralt finally finds her, when the reunion happens, it carries weight earned through hours of desperate searching and the knowledge of their deep bond. The game offered multiple endings based on how Geralt treated Ciri throughout the story. Did he have faith in her, respect her agency, support her emotionally? Or did he try to control her, make decisions for her, fail to see her as the capable person she'd become? The final outcome reflected these accumulated choices, delivering consequences that felt earned rather than arbitrary. The Witcher 3's release proved an unqualified triumph. Critics awarded it some of the highest scores in gaming history, with many publications giving it perfect marks and declaring it one of the greatest games ever made. Players embraced it with equal fervour. The game shipped over 10 million copies by March 2016, just 10 months after launch. It won over 800 awards, including more than 250 Game of the Year accolades, more than any other game in history at that time. The Witcher 3 transcended the RPG genre to become a cultural phenomenon, recognized even by people who didn't play video games as a landmark achievement in interactive storytelling. But CD Projekt RED wasn't finished. On October 13, 2015, the first major expansion, Hearts of Stone, launched. This wasn't DLC in the traditional sense, small additions or extra missions bolted onto the main game. Hearts of Stone was a complete story arc offering 10 to 15 hours of content, introducing new characters, mechanics, and one of the most compelling villains in gaming, Gaunter O'Dim, a mysterious entity who grants wishes but collects terrible prices. The expansion's story explored themes of damnation and redemption, with sophistication matching the base game's best quests. Then on May 31st, 2016 came Blood and Wine, the second and final expansion. This one dwarfed even Hearts of Stone, adding an entirely new region, Toussaint, a duchy that felt transplanted from a different game entirely. Where Velen was mud and misery, Toussaint was sunshine and wine. Where war had devastated the north, Toussaint remained largely untouched, a land of chivalry and romance hiding dark secrets. The expansion delivered 20 to 30 hours of content, its own self-contained story about a serial killer targeting knights, a complex mystery involving curses and family tragedy that built to a genuinely surprising conclusion. Blood and Wine served as a farewell to Geralt. CD Projekt RED had stated this would be the final chapter in his story, and they crafted an ending that honoured the character and his journey. The expansion concluded with Geralt retiring to a vineyard in Toussaint, finally finding peace after a lifetime of monster hunting and political intrigue. Players could visit him there, walk through the home he'd made, see mementos from his adventures. It was a gentle, bittersweet conclusion to a trilogy that had taken players through some of gaming's darkest and most morally complex narratives. While the three main Witcher games formed the cornerstone of CD Projekt RED's success, the studio and their partners explored the universe through various spin-offs, adaptations, and experimental projects. These range from fully realized games in different genres to mobile experiments and tabletop adaptations, each attempting to capture some aspect of The Witcher's appeal while reaching new audiences or exploring different gameplay possibilities. Gwent. The Witcher card game emerged from a mini-game within The Witcher 3. In that game, Gwent served as an optional distraction. Players could challenge NPCs to card games, collect cards and build decks. The simplicity of its rules combined with surprising strategic depth made Gwent unexpectedly popular. Players spent hours tracking down rare cards and seeking out challenging opponents, sometimes prioritizing Gwent over the actual main quest. CD Projekt RED noticed this enthusiasm and decided to expand Gwent into a standalone competitive card game. The standalone Gwent launched in open beta in May 2017, eventually receiving a full release in October 2018. Unlike The Witcher 3's simplified version, standalone Gwent featured extensive deck-building options, hundreds of cards, multiple factions each with unique mechanics, and a competitive ranked ladder. The game adopted a free-to-play model with cosmetic purchases and card packs, competing in the digital card game space against giants like Hearthstone and Magic: The Gathering Arena. Gwent differentiated itself through its unique rule set. Matches consisted of 3 rounds with a shared pool of cards, meaning you had to carefully manage resources across multiple rounds rather than drawing fresh cards each round. Positioning mattered. Row placement affected card abilities and interactions. Weather effects and special abilities created complex tactical situations. The game rewarded careful planning and psychological warfare, as knowing when to pass a round, when to commit resources, and how to bluff your opponent proved as important as deck construction. The game found a dedicated audience, though it never achieved the mainstream success of Hearthstone. CD Projekt RED continued supporting Gwent with expansions, balance patches, and competitive tournaments. The game spawned its own esports scene, with championship events offering substantial prize pools. More importantly, Gwent demonstrated CD Projekt RED's willingness to experiment beyond traditional RPGs and their ability to identify what players enjoyed about their games, then amplify those elements into standalone experiences. From Gwent emerged another project, Thronebreaker: The Witcher Tales, a single-player RPG that used Gwent's mechanics as its combat system. Released in October 2018, Thronebreaker told an original story set during the Second Northern War, focusing on Queen Maeve of Lyria and Rivia as she attempts to defend her kingdoms from Nilfgaardian invasion. The game blended exploration, decision-making and resource management with Gwent battles, creating a unique hybrid experience. Thronebreaker allowed CD Projekt RED to explore storytelling possibilities within the Witcher universe beyond Geralt's perspective. Queen Maeve faced different challenges than a Witcher: political machinations, managing an army, balancing the needs of her people against military necessity. The game presented moral choices with kingdom-wide consequences. Who would you spare or execute? Which alliances would you form? How would you respond to betrayal? These decisions shaped Maeve's story and determined which units you could recruit for your Gwent army. The puzzle battles in Thronebreaker showcased creative uses of Gwent mechanics. Rather than simply defeating an opponent through superior cards, many encounters required solving specific challenges, protect a unit for a certain number of turns, remove enemies using only certain abilities, win with severe restrictions on your deck. These puzzles transformed Gwent from a competitive card game into a strategic puzzle system, demonstrating the versatility of the core mechanics. Thronebreaker received critical acclaim for its storytelling, art direction, and innovative use of Gwent mechanics in a single-player context. However, sales disappointed CD Projekt RED's expectations. The game released during a crowded period, and its positioning as a Gwent spin-off may have confused potential players who didn't realize it was primarily a story-driven RPG. Nevertheless, Thronebreaker represented another successful experiment, proving the Witcher universe could support diverse gameplay styles and protagonists beyond Geralt. The Witcher. Monster Slayer took The Witcher into augmented reality territory. Developed by Spocko, a studio within CD Projekt's Capital Group, Monster Slayer launched in July 2021 for iOS and Android devices. The game borrowed heavily from Pokémon Go's template. Players explored real-world locations, encountered monsters in AR through their phone cameras, and fought them using simplified combat mechanics. The game incorporated time-of-day mechanics, with certain monsters appearing only during specific hours, and weather effects that influenced which creatures spawned. Monster Slayer's combat used simplified versions of the Witcher's systems, timed strikes, dodging, signs, and potions. Players could gather ingredients from real-world exploration, craft potions and oils, and upgrade their Witcher through a progression system. The game included story quests that unfolded over time, providing narrative context for the monster hunting gameplay. While Monster Slayer never achieved the massive success of Pokémon Go, it found an audience of Witcher fans who enjoyed the novelty of hunting drowners and griffins in their neighborhoods. Earlier mobile attempts produced mixed results. The Witcher. Crimson Trail, released in the mid-2000s for mobile phones, told a story of young Geralt during his training. The technical limitations of mobile phones at the time severely constrained the experience, and the game remained curiosity known mainly to completionists. The Witcher versus a Flash-based browser fighting game from 2008 allowed players to create characters from 3 classes: Witcher, Sorceress, or Frightener, and battle other players online. The game had minimal narrative content, serving primarily as a multiplayer diversion tied to the Witcher promotional campaign. The Witcher Battle Arena, a MOBA released in 2015 for mobile devices, attempted to capitalize on the MOBA genre's popularity. Players controlled Witcher universe characters in 3 versus 3 battles, capturing objectives and defeating opponents. Despite featuring well-known characters and decent production values, Battle Arena struggled to find an audience in the crowded MOBA market dominated by League of Legends, Dota 2 and mobile competitors. The game shut down in 2015 after failing to attract a sustainable player base. CD Projekt RED also partnered with board game developers to bring The Witcher to tabletop gaming. The Witcher, adventure game created with Fantasy Flight Games, provided a 2 to 4 player board game experience where players took on roles of different characters exploring the world, completing quests and facing challenges. The game translated The Witcher's moral complexity and decision-making into board game mechanics, though it never achieved the mainstream success of other fantasy board games. More recently, Go On Board partnered with CD Projekt RED to create The Witcher: Old World, released in 2023. This ambitious board game served as a prequel, set when Witcher schools thrived and monsters roamed more freely. Players assumed roles of different Witchers, exploring the continent, hunting monsters, and developing their characters. The game incorporated deck-building mechanics, exploration, and combat in a package that garnered praise from both Witcher fans and board game enthusiasts. Subsequent project The Witcher: Legacy was crowdfunded in 2025, continuing Go On Board's tabletop interpretation of the franchise. These diverse projects demonstrated several things about The Witcher as a franchise. First, the universe had sufficient depth and flexibility to support different genres and platforms. Second, while Geralt's main adventures represented the franchise's core, there was appetite for stories exploring other characters and time periods. Third, not every experiment would succeed. Some projects found dedicated audiences while others struggled to gain traction. But CD Projekt RED's willingness to license the property for various adaptations and spin-offs helped keep The Witcher relevant between major game releases and exposed the franchise to audiences who might never play a 100-hour RPG. Behind The Witcher game's success lay a complicated relationship between CD Projekt RED and Andrzej Sapkowski, the author who created the universe that made everything possible. This relationship, marked by mutual benefit but also tension over compensation, eventually required legal intervention to resolve, highlighting the complex dynamics between original creators and those who adapt their work into different media. When CD Projekt RED initially approached Sapkowski about licensing The Witcher for a video game in the early 2000s, video game adaptations of literary properties had a poor track record. Movie and television adaptations could make books into bestsellers, but games were niche, often poorly made cash grabs that contributed little to a property's value or reputation. Sapkowski, by his own later admission, had no faith that a video game would amount to anything significant. He therefore accepted a one-time lump sum payment for the license, rather than negotiating for royalties based on the game's sales. This decision made perfect sense from Sapkowski's perspective at the time. CD Projekt RED was an unknown company with no development experience. The proposed game might never be completed. Even if it was, it might sell poorly. Taking guaranteed money up front represented the conservative, rational choice. Sapkowski reportedly said in interviews that he believed the games would be a flop and took what he could get immediately rather than gambling on potential future earnings. Of course, the Witcher games didn't flop. They became one of the most successful RPG franchises in history. The Witcher 3 alone sold over 50 million copies, generated hundreds of millions in revenue, and transformed The Witcher from a regionally popular book series into a global phenomenon. The games drove enormous interest in Sapkowski's original novels, leading to translations into dozens of languages and sales that dwarfed what the books had achieved before the games existed. The Netflix series adaptation, which began development in 2017 and premiered in 2019, likely wouldn't have happened without the games establishing The Witcher as a valuable intellectual property in Western markets. Watching this success from the sidelines while receiving none of the game's revenue understandably frustrated Sapkowski. In October 2018, he sent formal notice to CD Projekt RED demanding additional compensation. The amount requested exceeded 60 million Polish zloty, roughly $16 million. At the time, Sapkowski's legal argument rested on provisions in Polish copyright law that allow creators to seek additional compensation when an adaptation proves far more successful than initially anticipated by both parties. The demand created an awkward situation. CD Projekt RED had fulfilled their original agreement completely. They paid what was agreed upon, and had acted entirely within their legal rights. They had also, through their creative efforts and financial investment, taken Sapkowski's creation to heights it likely never would have reached otherwise. The games introduced millions of people worldwide to The Witcher, who subsequently purchased Sapkowski's books. In many markets, readers discovered the books because they loved the games, reversing the typical adaptation dynamic. But Sapkowski had a counter-argument. None of that success would have been possible without his original creation. CD Projekt RED built their empire on foundations he laid. The characters, the world, the lore, the moral complexity, these came from his imagination and decades of writing. While the games added to the universe and told new stories, they fundamentally depended on what Sapkowski created. From this perspective, his request for additional compensation had merit, even if it wasn't strictly required by their original contract. CD Projekt RED responded carefully. They acknowledged that they had met all obligations under the original agreement, but expressed willingness to negotiate amicably with Sapkowski. The company understood that maintaining a positive relationship with the source material's creator had value beyond the immediate financial questions. They were planning future Witcher projects. The Netflix series was in production. Having Sapkowski as an adversary rather than a collaborator would complicate everything. Negotiations proceeded privately through 2018 and into early 2019. In February 2019, CD Projekt announced they had reached a settlement agreement with Sapkowski. The terms remained confidential, but the settlement would provide Sapkowski with additional royalties from the games. The amount almost certainly fell well short of his initial demand. CD Projekt RED had no obligation to pay anything, and had leverage in negotiations. But the settlement acknowledged Sapkowski's contribution and established a framework for future cooperation on new Witcher projects. The resolution demonstrated pragmatism from both parties. Sapkowski gained financial compensation and formal recognition of his creation's value to the game's success. CD Projekt RED maintained a working relationship with the author and avoided protracted legal battles that would have been expensive, distracting, and potentially damaging to the franchise's reputation. The settlement allowed both parties to move forward productively rather than remaining locked in acrimony. This episode illustrated broader questions about adaptation, intellectual property, and fair compensation. Who deserves credit and profit when one medium's success drives another's? The games wouldn't exist without Sapkowski's books, but the book's global success came largely from the game's popularity. This symbiotic relationship defied simple accounting. Both the original creator and the adapters contributed essential elements. The The settlement represented an attempt to acknowledge this complexity rather than pretending clear-cut answers existed. Sapkowski's relationship with the games remained ambivalent even after the settlement. In interviews, he continued to distinguish between his canonical books and the games, which he considered a separate entity. He expressed pride in his original creation, while maintaining some distance from its video game interpretation. This stance was perfectly reasonable. The games, while respecting the source material, did take liberties with characters and lore, told stories Sapkowski didn't write, and existed in a different creative space than his novels. Authors often have complicated feelings about adaptations of their work, and Sapkowski was no exception. For CD Projekt RED, the settlement removed a potential obstacle to future Witcher projects. They could continue developing games knowing the original author had been compensated fairly and would likely continue serving as a creative consultant when needed. The relationship wouldn't be without its tensions. Creative collaborations rarely are, but it was functional and mutually beneficial. Both parties had reasons to want the Witcher franchise to continue thriving, even if they sometimes disagreed on specifics. By early 2026, the Witcher franchise had sold approximately 85 million units across all games, making it one of the best-selling video game franchises in history. This commercial success, impressive in itself, represented only one measure of the series' impact. The Witcher had influenced game development, storytelling approaches, and player expectations in ways that extended far beyond sales figures, helping to redefine what RPGs could be and establishing CD Projekt RED as one of the industry's most respected developers. The influence on narrative design proved particularly significant. Before the Witcher series, especially The Witcher 2 and 3, most RPGs offered choice in the form of obvious good/evil binaries, or cosmetic variations that didn't meaningfully affect the story. The Witcher demonstrated that games could present genuinely difficult moral decisions, where every option had merit and consequences, where choosing the lesser evil meant carefully weighing competing values rather than selecting an option flagged as good or bad. This approach influenced subsequent RPG development, with games like Dragon Age, Inquisition, Mass Effect's later entries, and numerous others attempting to create more nuanced moral systems. The handling of side quests became another major influence. The Witcher 3 proved that open-world games didn't need to pad their maps with repetitive busywork. Quality could trump quantity. Each question mark could lead to something designed and meaningful rather than another. Identical Bandit Camp. This philosophy influenced games like Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, and even franchises that had previously relied on quantity over quality. The message was clear. Players would engage more deeply with carefully crafted content than with endless repetition. The series also demonstrated that games could successfully adapt existing literary properties while maintaining the source material's complexity and mature themes. Too many adaptations simplified their sources, filing off edges to achieve broader appeal. The Witcher games leaned into the darkness, the moral ambiguity, the political intrigue, and the unflinching examination of prejudice and violence that characterize Sapkowski's novels. This approach found a massive audience, proving that players wanted sophisticated adult storytelling that respected their intelligence rather than patronizing them with simplified narratives. CD Projekt RED's post-launch support philosophy became another influential aspect of the series' legacy. The enhanced editions of the first two games, released as free updates to existing owners, established a precedent of supporting games well beyond release. The substantial free DLC for The Witcher 3 new quests, armor sets, and alternative looks arrived, alongside the paid expansions, giving players regular reasons to return to the game. This approach built enormous goodwill and influenced industry conversations about appropriate DLC practices and post-launch support. For Poland and the Polish game development industry, The Witcher represented a watershed moment. Before CD Projekt RED's success, Polish developers existed on the industry's periphery, creating games for local markets or serving as outsourcing partners for Western studios. The Witcher proved that Polish studios could compete at the highest level, that Polish culture and history could fuel globally successful games, and that you didn't need to be in California or Japan to create world-class interactive entertainment. The series' success inspired a generation of Polish developers and helped establish Poland as a significant force in game development. The franchise's cultural impact extended beyond gaming. The Netflix series, premiering in December 2019, introduced The Witcher to entirely new audiences. While the show drew from Sapkowski's books rather than directly adapting the games, its existence owed much to the games establishing The Witcher as a valuable property in Western markets. The show's success drove further book sales and game sales in a virtuous cycle. People who watched the show played the games. People who played the games read the books. People who read the books watched the show, each medium feeding interest in the others. The character of Geralt himself became iconic, his white hair, yellow eyes, and dual swords instantly recognizable even to people who had never played the games. Doug Cockle's voice performance, delivered in a distinctive gravelly tone, became synonymous with the character. Cosplayers at conventions regularly dressed as Geralt, Yennefer, Ciri, or other Witcher characters. The series had transcended being merely successful games to becoming a cultural touchstone, a shared reference point across different media and different countries. Awards and critical recognition accumulated throughout the franchise's history. The Witcher 3 alone won over 800 awards, including more than 250 Game of the Year accolades from various publications and organizations. It regularly appeared in lists of the greatest games ever made, often placing in the top 10 or even top 5. The game achieved a rare combination of critical acclaim, commercial success, and lasting cultural relevance, remaining widely discussed and played years after release. The financial success transformed CD Projekt RED from a small Polish studio into a major international company. The company's valuation soared, eventually making it one of Europe's most valuable game developers. This financial strength allowed them to pursue ambitious new projects like Cyberpunk 2077 and plan extensive future Witcher content. The series had provided the foundation for everything that followed, proof that their approach to game development, prioritizing story, respecting players, and supporting games post-launch, could succeed both critically and commercially. The modding community embraced the Witcher games, particularly The Witcher 3, creating thousands of modifications that expanded content, improved visuals, or adjusted gameplay systems. CD Projekt RED's decision to release official modding tools encouraged this community, and some mods achieved significant popularity, demonstrating the depth of player engagement with the world and systems. This active modding scene helped keep the games relevant years after release, with players returning to experience new community-created content. Perhaps most importantly, the Witcher series proved that games could tell stories that resonated emotionally on par with the best films or novels. The ending of The Witcher 3, where Geralt's relationship with Ciri throughout the game determines her fate, brought players to tears. The Bloody Baron's tragic story arc stayed with people long after they finished the quest. The small moments of humour between Geralt and his companions provided levity and warmth. These weren't just games with stories attached. They were narrative experiences that used interactivity to deepen emotional impact in ways only games could achieve. Even as The Witcher 3 and its expansions concluded Geralt's story, CD Projekt RED made clear that the franchise would continue. New games would explore different time periods, different characters, and potentially different gameplay approaches while remaining true to the core of what made The Witcher compelling. Multiple projects entered development, each representing different directions the franchise might expand while maintaining the quality and sophistication players expected. In October 2022, CD Projekt RED announced a remake of the original Witcher game under the codename Canis Majoris. Later formally titled The Witcher Remake, this project would rebuild the 2007 game from the ground up, using Unreal Engine 5 rather than CD Projekt RED's proprietary REDengine. The development would be handled primarily by Fool's Theory, a Polish studio with deep connections to CD Projekt RED. Many Fool's Theory staff members had previously worked at CD Projekt RED on various Witcher games. CD Projekt RED would provide full creative supervision, ensuring the remake honoured the original while taking advantage of modern technology. The decision to remake the first game made strategic sense. The Witcher had introduced many people to the series, but its age and rough edges made it increasingly difficult to recommend to new players. The combat system felt dated, the graphics couldn't compete with modern standards, and various technical limitations constrained what the developers could achieve. A remake could preserve the story, characters, and moral complexity that made the original special, while modernizing everything else. Combat, visuals, interface, and technical performance. Using Unreal Engine 5 represented a significant shift from CD Projekt RED's previous approach of building proprietary technology. REDengine had served them well through The Witcher 2 and 3, but maintaining a custom engine required significant resources and specialized expertise. Unreal Engine 5 offered cutting-edge technology, extensive documentation, a large developer community, and regular updates from Epic Games. By transitioning to Unreal, CD Projekt RED could redirect engineering resources toward gameplay and content rather than fundamental engine development. This pragmatic decision suggested the company had learned from their experiences and was willing to use the best tools available, rather than insisting on doing everything in-house. The remake would likely reimagine the original game structure, rather than simply upscaling it. Based on what we can infer from CD Projekt RED statements, and the technology being used, the remake could feature open-world explorations similar to The Witcher 3, modernized combat mechanics, and expanded content that fills in gaps from the original. The story would remain fundamentally the same: Geralt's amnesia, the Salamandra conspiracy, the political intrigue in Vizima, but the execution would reflect everything CD Projekt RED learned from developing 3 games and numerous expansions. Project Polaris represented CD Projekt RED's plans for a new Witcher trilogy, a second saga that would take the franchise forward after Geralt's retirement. In March 2022, CD Projekt RED confirmed they were developing the next entry in the Witcher series, which would begin a new trilogy. Like the remake, this project would use Unreal Engine 5. Details remained scarce about the story, protagonist, or time period, but one major reveal came in December 2024. Ciri would serve as the protagonist. This decision made narrative sense. The Witcher 3 heavily featured Ciri, established her powers and personality, and left her story with room for continuation. Players had invested in her character, and shifting focus to Ciri allowed CD Projekt RED to explore new narrative territory while maintaining connections to the established trilogy. Ciri's unique abilities, her capacity to travel between worlds, her elder blood heritage, her combat training from both Geralt and the sorceresses, provided gameplay possibilities distinct from Geralt's skill set. However, some controversial questions surrounded Ciri as protagonist. In Sapkowski's books and the games, Ciri never underwent the mutations that create witchers. She was trained in witcher combat techniques but lacked the enhanced senses, altered metabolism, and other biological changes that define witchers. Could she properly be called a witcher? Would the game explain how she might have undergone mutations as an adult? Or would it redefine what being a witcher means, focusing on the profession and philosophy rather than the biological transformation? These questions generated debate among fans, though most seemed willing to trust CD Projekt RED to handle the transition thoughtfully. The decision to develop an entirely new trilogy rather than a single game demonstrated CD Projekt RED's confidence in the franchise's longevity and their commitment to long-term planning. They weren't simply making one more Witcher game to capitalize on the brand. They were planning another epic saga that would presumably span 6 to 8 years of development and release, maintaining The Witcher as a pillar of their business strategy well into the 2030s. This suggested internal projections showing strong demand for Witcher content and belief that the universe remained commercially viable for years to come. Project Sirius represented an experimental direction for the franchise. Announced as being developed by the Molasses Flood with support from CD Projekt RED, Sirius would offer both single-player and multiplayer components, including a campaign with quests and story alongside multiplayer gameplay. This marked the first time The Witcher would feature significant multiplayer mechanics in a mainline adjacent project, excluding the card game Gwent and failed experiments like Battle Arena. The concept of Witcher multiplayer generated mixed reactions. The series had always been deeply single-player, focused on personal stories and individual moral choices. How would multiplayer fit into that framework? Would it be cooperative hunting with friends, competitive monster hunter duels, shared exploration of the world? The Molasses Flood, known for survival games, suggested Sirius might incorporate survival mechanics, but concrete details remained sparse even into 2026. In March 2023, CD Projekt RED announced they had rebooted Sirius's development, suggesting the initial direction hadn't satisfied their standards or aligned with their vision for the franchise. This willingness to restart troubled projects rather than pushing forward with subpar work echoed their handling of Cyberpunk 2077's development issues, and suggested a commitment to quality over arbitrary deadlines. The reboot likely meant Sirius wouldn't release until the late 2000s at earliest, but when it did arrive, it would hopefully represent a thoughtful integration of multiplayer into the Witcher universe, rather than a forced addition. Beyond video games, The Witcher continued expanding through other media. The Netflix series proceeded into its third season and beyond, with multiple spin-offs in development including The Rats, Sirens of the Deep, and a prequel series. These productions, while not directly controlled by CD Projekt RED, kept The Witcher in mainstream consciousness and drove continued interest in the games. The symbiotic relationship between different media meant success in one area benefited all others. A popular Netflix season drove game sales. New game releases increased viewership. Both pushed book sales. The tabletop gaming space saw continued growth with projects like The Witcher, Old World and The Witcher, Legacy bringing the franchise to board game enthusiasts. These products demonstrated The Witcher's versatility and the strength of the underlying EP. A franchise that could support successful video games, television series, novels, comic books, and board games across multiple decades proved its enduring appeal and flexibility. CD Projekt RED's broader strategy seemed to position The Witcher as a pillar franchise alongside Cyberpunk, their other major property. While Cyberpunk 2077 had suffered a troubled launch, its long-term success and the positive reception of its Phantom Liberty expansion suggested CD Projekt RED could sustain multiple active franchises. The Witcher would continue receiving major releases every few years, providing consistent revenue and maintaining the company's reputation while allowing resources to support other projects. The transition to Unreal Engine 5 for future Witcher projects represented a philosophical shift. REDengine had served them well, but required constant maintenance and updates. Every new game meant rebuilding or extensively modifying engine systems. By adopting Unreal, CD Projekt RED joined the majority of game developers using established engines, prioritizing practical efficiency over technical independence. This suggested a more mature approach to development, one willing to accept that sometimes the best solution is to use tools others have built rather than insisting on proprietary solutions. Looking forward, The Witcher's future appeared secure. Multiple games in various stages of development, continuing media adaptations, sustained sales of existing games, particularly The Witcher 3, which continued selling years after release thanks to word-of-mouth sales and the Netflix series driving new interest. The franchise had transcended its origins as a relatively obscure Polish book series to become a global phenomenon recognizable across continents and demographics. From the failed Metropolis software attempt in the 1990s to selling 85 million units by 2026, from a small Polish distributor-turned-developer to one of Europe's most valuable gaming companies, from regional books to international multimedia franchise. The Witcher's journey represented one of gaming's great success stories. It proved that sophisticated, mature storytelling could find a massive audience, that respecting players and supporting games post-launch built loyalty and goodwill, and that you didn't need to compromise artistic vision to achieve commercial success. The white-haired Witcher who began his digital life in 2007 had travelled far. Geralt might be retired, sitting in his vineyard in Toussaint, but the world he inhabited continued to expand. New Witchers would take up the hunt. New stories would unfold across the continent. New players would discover what it means to navigate a world of moral greys, where every choice carries weight and monsters wear many faces. The Saga continued, and based on everything CD Projekt RED had accomplished, it would continue for many years to come. The Witcher games had achieved something rare. They had created a universe players didn't want to leave. After hundreds of hours in the games, people wanted more. They wanted to explore different time periods, meet new characters, discover hidden corners of the continent. That hunger drove the franchise forward, ensuring that even after Geralt's story concluded, the world he inhabited remained very much alive. And so the hunt continues, the silver sword stays sharp and monsters still prowl the darkness, waiting for witchers brave enough to face them. In the end, the Witcher franchise demonstrated that video games could be art, that interactive storytelling could rival or surpass traditional narratives, and that players craved depth, complexity, and meaningful choices. From that first risky gamble by an inexperienced Polish studio to a multimedia empire spanning games, television, books, and beyond, The Witcher proved that believing in your vision, respecting your audience, and refusing to compromise on quality could lead to something truly special. The White Wolf's legacy would endure, inspiring developers and captivating players for generations to come.